Hello, my name is Danielle Theodore, and in today's professional development, we will be learning how to implement a learner-centered assessment using the PDSA cycle. And this is a practical approach for strengthening student involvement and learning in our classrooms. Today, we're going to learn how to implement a learner-centered assessment using the PDSA cycle. So what is a learner-centered assessment? A learner-centered assessment focuses on helping students learn rather than simply measuring how well they learn. This approach has students taking ownership over their learning. It is learner-centered. The students are actively engaging in the learning process and participating in the learning process. As this occurs, our students are developing higher order thinking skills, they're building their problem-solving skills, they're taking ownership of their learning, and they're working on collaborating with their peers and working well with others. So what is the PDSA cycle? The PDSA cycle stands for plan, do, study, and act. And W. Edwards Deming established this cycle, the PDSA method, and it's a meta-assessment tool for teachers in determining the success of an evaluation or assessment. So why is the PDSA cycle important? This cycle can be used to analyze and make improvements to assessment. This cycle is helpful for teachers in determining whether a modification to an assessment works or what modification needs to be implemented. The whole goal here is to improve the outcome of our students and their learning and the outcome of assessment. The PDSA cycle provides teachers with valuable feedback, allowing us to continually learn and grow as well as our students. The first phase in the cycle stands for plan, and this is planning a student-centered assessment activity while considering the advantages. The second part of the cycle is the doing. So in this part of the cycle, you do or conduct a pilot assessment exactly as planned. And we're going to take a look at a pilot assessment that I planned today for a science lesson. The third part of the cycle is study, and in this phase, teachers study and determine whether the assessment offered has expected advantages for our students. And finally, the last part of the cycle is act, and that's when us as teachers are acting on what was learned during the study phase before we re-implement the assessment with future students. So let's take a look at the first phase, the plan. And I have created a pilot group, and this is for a second grade science class. There's 20 students in the class, 10 are boys, 10 are girls. Today's topic in our science lesson is matter and its uses, and this is a 45-minute lesson. We have 6 Hispanic students, 4 Caucasian, 5 African American, and there's 3 mixed race students, a total of 20 students. We have 12 English speakers and 8 English language learners. There is 1 student with an IEP. Our learning goals for the science lesson and assessment is students will identify and describe different types of matter, solids, liquids, and gases. And students will explain how different materials are used in everyday objects. So what is the objective and what is the criteria? For this particular assessment, the objective, the primary goal, is for our students to understand that matter can be anything that takes up space and has mass. Within this lesson, students have the opportunity to identify and classify different objects based on their properties and uses. Now, this is a student-centered assessment. In this lesson, we have a student-centered assessment, and it's team-based, okay? It's super interactive and engaging for our students. It's very hands-on, and students are sharing objects, they're trusting one another, they're working on their team building skills, and there's an opportunity for reflection, and the students can engage in student discourse, providing assistance to one another, as well as coaching from the teacher. The criteria for the assessment in this pilot assessment is students are active participants in the assessment. They're working collaboratively with their peers and the teacher to use the assessment, and the students are collaborating with the teacher to share feedback about the assessment. Now, the students will be in the science classroom during the assigned and scheduled science period, and this is a 45-minute lesson. The teacher will arrange desks or tables in groups for the collaborative portion of the activity in today's lessons. There's also going to be a designated area for sorting and hands-on exploration. So how are we going to collect data? So there's 3 different ways: observation, participation, and evaluation. For observation, we're going to look at, can students sort the materials, the objects, into solids, liquids, and gases? For participation, did the students discuss the different uses of materials in class activities, these collaborative activities? And finally, there's an evaluation, and the students need to draw and label materials and their uses. So did the student draw and label materials and their uses? What is the expected impact? So the assessment activities, which include sorting materials, discussing its uses, and drawing examples of kinds of matter, are intended to help students better understand matter and its states. Students' understanding of these science concepts and the practical applications will be strengthened by actively engaging in sorting and categorization. So, the do phase, okay? This is when we are developing the assessment. So, first off, I'm going to introduce the concept with my students. I'm going to start with a brief interactive explanation of matter and its 3 states. Then I'm going to introduce the matter sorting activity, and this is the collaborative hands-on activity. I'm going to divide the students into groups and assign each group a set of objects. In these groups, students work collaboratively to categorize the objects by their properties. In these groups, the students are going to discuss and present their sorting choices with the class. The application portion, I'm going to show pictures or examples of objects made from different materials, and as a whole group, we're going to discuss how each material is used. Then in the create and share portion of the activity, students are going to have to draw an example of each type of matter and label its uses. Now this will allow students to reflect on their learning and show me whether or not they're learning and meeting the learning goals. Then finally, we'll allow the students to share their drawings with the class. So throughout this lesson, students are engaging in peer tutoring, the collaborative portion of the lesson. They're also going to be engaging in an oral presentation and a self-assessment at the very end, drawing one type of matter and labeling its uses. Students are given the chance to participate in the assessment process, resulting in self-directed learning. And the self-assessment and reflection component is going to assist our students in deliberately using their metacognitive skills to reveal process, their thinking, and reasoning abilities while building a disposition toward the learning topic, which is matter and its uses. The students' observations and reflections, the drawing activity, will also provide me with useful feedback for improving the educational approach. So let's take a look at an example of an assessment I have here. In the assessment, the students are going to draw one example of each type of matter and label its use. Then we're going to allow students to share the drawings with the class. So as you can see here, there's a fill in the blank. My object is, they need to choose one solid, one liquid, and one gas. They're going to draw a picture here and label its use. In the study phase of the cycle, this is the data analysis, and I will be reviewing the data collected from the assessments to determine student understanding. In my observation, I'm going to be asking myself, can students sort materials into solids, liquids, and gases? Were the students engaged? I need to determine if student results are acceptable. For the participation portion of the lesson, I'm asking myself, did students discuss the different materials in class activities? Were they engaged and were they enjoying themselves? And in the evaluation, did the students correctly draw an example of each type of matter and label its use? This will give me good insight into whether or not they are meeting the learning objectives. In the study phase, I'm also evaluating the effectiveness. I will use the evaluation and the observations of student participation and engagement to measure the effectiveness of the lesson, as well as feedback from my students about their understanding of the topic. Now, in this this process, I need to think about ways to improve, future interventions. Finally, the ACT phase of this cycle, and this is where teachers are going to revise the assessment for future use. So, some of the things that teachers need to consider is adjusting instruction. We have to, as teachers, identify any areas where our students struggled and plan to reteach the concepts with additional activities. Also, we might need to enhance engagement. If students enjoyed working collaboratively, I might have to consider incorporating more collaborating and hands-on activities. I also might need to modify the assessment. If needed, I might need to adjust the assessment criteria to align to the students' learning needs. And finally, I need to share insights. I need to reflect on what went well. I can share this feedback with my colleagues. I can collaborate with them to share ideas, insights, and feedback. In conclusion, a learner-centered assessment encourages students to reflect on their own learning. They take true ownership over their learning. In a learner-centered assessment, we utilize self-assessment and self-reflection in cooperative, collaborative, and supportive settings. And finally, learner-centered assessment relies on timely descriptive feedback from the students and from the teacher. Learner-centered assessments are so important because they focus on supporting our students in the learning process. We're helping them learn rather than simply measuring how well they learn. And finally, the PDSA cycle can help us as teachers identify whether a change to assessment is effective and how we can enhance the results. It provides feedback not only to ourselves in our own teaching practices, but also helps our students learn and grow. And that is it for today. Thank you for letting me speak to you. Have a nice rest of your afternoon.